Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning, afternoon, depending on where you are, maybe even night on the planet for this very important conversation. This what we are calling a call to action. My name is Ajamu Baraka. I am the chair of the Black Alliance for Peace, the coordinating committee. And we want to thank you again. We want to thank all of the members of the International Coalition to Stop Genocide in Palestine for being part of this process, for taking the lead in this process of attempting to address this ongoing criminal genocide in Gaza and indeed in Palestine itself. This is a discussion that we want to have that helps us to understand the connection between the legal struggle and what is the most important component of this resistance, and that is the political struggle. As many of you know, this coalition was pulled together in response to the information that we had that the South African government was going to take Israel to the International Court of Justice to evoke the provisions of the Genocide Convention. We understood that this was going to be a historic challenge and begin the process of pulling together forces that would be in position to try to facilitate a state support process for the South African case. A group of international lawyers were put in place. There was information that was developed that could facilitate the participation of various states in support of the South African case. But we also recognize too that beyond the legal challenge, as important as it is, that ultimately, because of the obvious criminality of this event and the collaboration of Western powers in this criminal enterprise, that it would be the people themselves globally, a bottom-up process, putting pressure on these governments that will be the ultimate factor in helping to bring about a resolution, if you will, of the ongoing occupation in Palestine. And so this is part of our mission today, that we're going to link the legal update on the legal challenges, but also, more importantly, talk about what needs to be done to continue to facilitate the global outrage that has developed in response to this situation in Gaza and its implications for the anti-colonial struggles worldwide. So we have a fantastic panel today. I'm going to, the panelists I'm going to introduce them one by one as we go. They are going to present about 10 minutes, 10 to 12 minutes per person. And then we are going to have an opportunities for Q&A. There is on the bottom bar of your Zoom link, there is a place where you can place questions for the panelists. And those questions will be the basis for the questions that will be presented to the panelists. We're quite sure we're not going to get a chance to get to all of them in this 90-minute webinar, but we'll try to pick out the ones that allow for the broadest conversation possible on this topic. We have with us Azhar, Sakoor, Marcy, Winograd, Pawel, Wargan, Lamis, Deek, and Fuad Abdul Saif. I'm going to introduce them this is the order, and I will introduce them further with a very short bio on each one of our panelists. So we're going to begin with our first panelist, Azhar Sakoor, who is an attorney and serves as executive with the Palestine Solidarity Alliance Youth League in South Africa. And I understand that he has, and NEFRA is getting ready to start, since we hear his voice, a video that he is going to share with us. Azhar, are you there?
Hey, hello everyone. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I come to you with the greetings of peace in Arabic. May peace and God's blessings be upon everyone. My name is Azhar Sakoor. I'm a lawyer based in South Africa, and I'm an executive member of the Palestine Solidarity Alliance Youth League in South Africa, also known as the PSAYL. The PSAYL is a proud member of the International Coalition to Stop Genocide in Palestine. And I firstly am quite sad that I'm not able to join you all today live. And I hope that the discussion thus far has been quite fruitful. I'm going to be looking forward to catching up on it when I have the opportunity to do so. Thank you to the organizers for having me join and pre-recording the session for me. And I hope that you find my thoughts to be insightful. I think when looking at the broader context of the different calls to actions taking place globally, I'd like to start off with the actions taking place from South Africa. Firstly, the actions by the South African government applying constant pressure on the international community, particularly using the World Court or the International Court of Justice to try and bring some sort of justice for Palestinians, particularly those in Gaza who are currently being murdered atrociously by the genocide machine, Israel. But beyond that, on the ground in South Africa, there is a massive call for solidarity with Palestinians, and we're quite glad to see that the South African government is currently actually acting and not just talking. So we're quite happy to see this happening from a South African front. On the ground, despite the actions from our government, we continue to show solidarity with the people of Palestine, and we have a number of events taking place. Currently, the month of March in South Africa is being commemorated as the Israeli Apartheid Month. Normally, Israeli Apartheid Week happens in the beginning of March. This year, we're doing a whole month of Israeli apartheid actions, creating awareness across the country of the atrocious behavior of the genocide machine, Israel. This is something that has been happening for years in South Africa, and it's quite important this year for us to highlight the atrocious actions taking place in Palestine. For us, the recognition of a single state is quite important. While personally, I'm quite happy, and the Palestine Solidarity Alliance Youth League is quite happy that the South African government is taking quite a bit of action. I think what's quite important, and the next step is the call for us in South Africa, one, for the South African government to endorse only a single state, one state for everyone. We're not talking about the murder of any single individual based on any criteria, or the removal of people from a particular place. What we want is a single land with a right of return for the Palestinians, a single land where everyone can live equally and be treated equally under a single judicial and territorial law, and not a military law that the Palestinians are currently being subjected to. So I think those are a few key important things from the background. The other thing is that we recently heard again the minister in South Africa, Naledi Pandor, again re-emphasizing her points that if any South Africans who are in the Israeli Defense Force return home, they will be arrested. In South Africa, there's a lot of movement on the ground for us to actually see that happen. Any South African who currently serves in the Israeli Defense Force, the moment their feet touches on South African ground, we want to see, and we're calling actively for their arrest. And I think that is a big movement that's happening from the public in South Africa. Another call to action that we're doing is we're continuing weekly protests in Johannesburg and Cape Town, and protests across the country showing our solidarity with the people of Palestine. We don't want any silence to be there. We don't want people to forget about the suffering of the Palestinian people, especially the current mass slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza. So those are key call to actions that are taking place currently in South Africa. Now, I've been asked by the organizers today to also just shed some light on the greater picture in terms of the geopolitical scale that's taking place, and how this may play out and how this may impact us in all of our different countries across the world. Now, I think as a starting point, when we look at the wider picture, in the past, what we've seen is America calling the shots. And for the first time in a very long time, we're actually seeing countries actively standing up and speaking against the decision of America, where the United States of America. We're seeing South Africa taking active steps against the advice of America against Israel at the World Court. We're seeing countries speaking up at the UN against what's happening in Palestine. America currently is complicit in the genocidal crimes in Palestine, in Gaza, and they have been arming Israel, and they are equally as guilty. The American government, I do want to clarify that, not the people of America. The people of America are quite friendly, and there's a lot that are standing in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in Palestine. We're talking about the American government. That is where there is a massive issue of support and complicity in the genocide that's taking place. So in the past, we would have seen the US vetoing, and they continue to veto a lot of decisions at the UN Security Council. But what we're starting to see is countries actively standing up and speaking out against it, saying no to the decision of the United States of America and of Israel. Now, in the wider geopolitical scale, in the past, a lot of countries would have been bullied down by America to keep silent. And what we're starting to see is sort of a revolution of the global South, because what's starting to take place is the current genocide in Palestine and the treatment of the Western world and the world powers to this situation versus other conflicts that have taken place. We can see the inequality that's starting to play out, and not even starting, that has been playing out, that people have not been turning a blind eye to. And now the public is becoming more and more increasingly aware of this. So we're seeing people all over the world realizing the hypocrisy of the Western governments, and are actually calling for their governments to stop their hypocritical behavior, where something is wrong, for example, in Ukraine, in Russia, in the Ukrainian-Russia conflict, but it's not seen as wrong in the context of Palestine and Israel. That is unacceptable, and we're starting to see people actually taking that into consideration. 2024 is a voting year, and it's an election year in a lot of countries across the world. And for the first time, foreign politics is playing a much bigger scale. And when we're talking about foreign politics, we're talking about countries' response to the Israeli genocide in Palestine, particularly in Gaza. So a lot of people are looking at what their local politicians are saying about this, and that's influencing their stance. It's important for voters across the world that this is an important stance to bear in mind, along with issues that are affecting you in your community. So we're not saying abandon your community issues. We're saying factor this in. Find a politician who you're going to back and support, who is going to also support causes that are just and moral, and who are not going to fund genocidal machines because of corporate greed. So I think that's something that's quite important. We're seeing calls massively across the world for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. A lot of companies are being boycotted. A big, to name some of the massive boycotts that are taking place globally is the McDonald's boycott, which has impacted McDonald's revenue globally. We've seen Starbucks and their global revenue being impacted globally. And I think the negative impact on their revenue sort of indicates the power of the boycott. And if we all stand together and boycott, we can make a difference. So that's one of the different ways. So if we're looking at the power of the people in boycotts, now you translate that to politics. Now, politicians are starting to become more and more conscious of what they're saying and who they're supporting, and governments are being more and more conscious. And now this boils to a bigger picture. You're going to have different types of governments that are now in place, because this is a factor that people are now placing in the forefront of their minds when actually voting. Looking at the wider geopolitical scale, looking at politics between countries, you're seeing people starting to work closer with other trade and economical alliances. We're seeing the growth of BRICS Plus. BRICS Plus has become BRICS Plus as of 1 January 2024, with a number of new countries joining BRICS. BRICS initially bring Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. They've now introduced a number of new countries into this alliance. Now, if the World Court fails, and currently we're seeing a lot of despondency in the UN being able to enforce the provisional measures ordered by the World Court. And the World Court not providing any further provisional measures, but reinforcing the fact that they had provided provisional measures which need to be enforced till today, where that was handed down, I believe, late January. We're now in March and we're still seeing no improvement. So the failure of the world to act in this is showing the reality of the situation, and it's going to call into question the reliability of these world structures. We may see ourselves within the next few years in a situation where global bodies such as the UN and the World Court may cease to exist, because the global South is starting to see that these structures are only in place for the West and the global North. But when it comes to us and our suffering in the global South, there's no care about it. And that is the struggle. The color of our skin, our religion, our gender. These are things which are now people speaking about. We are seeing that we're not being taken seriously. And these structures are only there for certain people. So looking at this wider scale, what we're starting to see, or what we're going to start to see, is people to start relying more on these alliances like BRICS Plus. I think you're going to see a lot more alliances coming up in the future as well, and people relying on them for bodies to possibly assist in negotiating certain agreements and reaching certain truces and helping countries reach a peaceful situation, because clearly the global bodies are unable to give effect to the purpose that they're there for. We're starting to see people move away from the reliance on the United States of America, and America is currently in a global geopolitical position where what they say has a lot less weight than what it did 2, 3, maybe even 5 years ago. Countries are no longer scared of the United States of America because their bullying tactics are starting to wear down, and are now aligning themselves with those who are not in favor with the behaviors of the United States of America, whose hands are not clean. The United States of America and Western governments' hands are not clean. They have been funding Israeli genocide, and the world is tired of it. So when we look at this wider geopolitical landscape, I think it's going to be a very interesting thing to watch. One of two things is probably going to happen. One, the global bodies are going to cave to the structure, cave to the pressure from the global South and change these structures. I mean, we saw earlier this month, I believe it was Malaysia speaking at the United Nations, talking about the abuse of the veto power in the Security Council, and talking about different ways to implement that. So, I mean, we could see a change in the structure of how these global bodies work, and hopefully that will see a lot more equality in these global structures. That is one way it could go. The other way it can go is we're probably going to see the collapse of these structures because the global south is going to have no faith in it and is not going to want to participate in it. So either way, from an international perspective, this is going to be fascinating to watch. I mean, we stand strongly in solidarity with the people of Palestine, for the people of Palestine and Gaza. We're hoping that their suffering comes to an end. We want to see a free Palestine, free for all, no matter your religion, your ethnicity, your cultural background, your gender. We want to see that you are able to be free in a free Palestine, whether, and I'm going to say this the way it currently is. We want to return to a place where whether you're Muslim, Jewish, Christian, or whatever faith you believe in, you're treated equally and you're friendly and you have this friendly neighborly behavior, as opposed to how it is now, where Israelis are conditioned to hate Palestinians and see them as less than human, as less than animal. So inshallah, with the will of God, we will see a free Palestine. The genocide will come to an end, and those responsible for the genocide and the murder and the slaughter of Palestinians are held accountable in this world and wherever else. As we believe as Muslims, in the year after the Day of Judgment, they will be held accountable. But for people, whatever your faith, we just hope to see peace. And I think that is the crux of the message. The importance of these global days of action and working with the international coalition to stop genocide in Palestine is quite important. If we can stand together, mobilize, and work as one global unit, we can show our governments that we are serious about this, and they need to take us seriously, and we can hopefully bring some positive change to the current situation of the Palestinians. Thank you so much to the hosts again for having me virtually. I do again apologize for not being able to have you to join the call live, but I look forward to hearing your feedback when I watch the recording. And please do go and visit the Palestine Solidarity Alliance Youth League PSA_YL. So it's at PSA_YL on Instagram and X. Feel free to leave any comments you may have for me by DMing those accounts of the Palestine Solidarity Alliance Youth League, and we'll try to get back to you. Thank you so much.
We want to thank our comrade for those very enlightening comments. He has basically raised a number of questions that we can deal with in the Q&A. But one of the most important ones is the shift in consciousness globally that's taking place. A recognition that the institutions set up at the end of the Second Imperialist War, known as World War II, were structures or institutions that were put in place primarily to maintain and expand Western hegemony. Those structures and institutions have been exposed. One of the other elements that the comrade touched on in terms of this transformation taking place in terms of consciousness is the fact that the ideal that these Western nations have any inkling of the concepts of democracy and human rights should be swept into the dustbins of history as one of the most ineffective ideological tools ever created that obscure the reality of the global social relations that we have been exposed to for the last few hundred years. And in particular, this connection between the settler colonial project in Palestine and the mother of all settler colonial projects, the United States of America. These relationships are being exposed in ways that they've never been exposed before. And that's why we say that there's no turning back on this. And that's why it's so vitally important that we recognize the potential agency of the organized global community to intensify those contradictions and to take our global struggle against Western colonialism to another level. Next, we have with us, we're so happy, Marcy, Winograd. who is the co-host with Medea Benjamin from CODEPINK, the CODEPINK Congress, a bi-monthly program on U.S. foreign policy. In addition, she co-produces CODEPINK's radio, a podcast aired on most Pacifica stations in the U.S., and oversees CODEPINK's campaign to support South Africa's case at the World Court. Thank you so much, Marcy.
Thank you so much, Baraka, and all of you who have organized this event today. I'm so honored to be with you and wonderful to hear Azhar, and we love you, South Africa. At CODEPINK, we have brought flowers to the South African consulate. We have teams all over the country, but primarily right now in New York City, visiting the UN missions, encouraging them to denounce Israeli genocide in Gaza, to support South Africa at the International Court of Justice. And we have a web portal you may want to visit with some interesting links. It's called codepink.org/ICJ resources, codepink.org/ICJ resources. Right now we have CODEPINK activists visiting. Of course, they've been out in the street calling for, and on Capitol Hill calling for an end to U.S. support for this genocide, no more weapons for Israel. We're also at the United Nations calling on other countries to end their complicity, specifically Turkey in shipping oil through the Ceyhan pipeline to Israel, and also Jordan, despite the Queen's eloquent support for Palestinians. We know that Jordan is allowing goods to be transported on the Jordan Highway. But getting back to the United States and what we're doing, as CODEPINK activists, we've been out in the streets supporting, we just had a vigil in New York City to honor Aaron Bushnell, the U.S. service member who was part of the Air Force, who self-immolated in protest of U.S. support for this genocide, not just support, but complicity. We have also, as I mentioned, rallies, protests throughout the country. I've been asked to talk about specifically CODEPINK's work on Capitol Hill with Congress to try to stop this genocide. And my colleague, Medea Benjamin, she has organized, my big shout out to her, lots of love to her. She's organized 20 to 40 people every day on Capitol Hill, bird dogging these politicians, videotaping them. Are you going to support a ceasefire? When are you going to support a ceasefire? How many children, how many people, how many Palestinians have to be murdered, injured, displaced before you will support a permanent ceasefire? We do see some fault lines now occurring at the Capitol. We had our Senate Majority Leader, and it's a very slim majority in the Senate, who excoriated Benjamin Netanyahu on the floor of the U.S. Senate, actually called for new elections to kick out Netanyahu. And I think what we're seeing is fear amongst those who have been most supportive of Israel and the Israel lobby, Senator Chuck Schumer from New York, who are fearful that, number one, they could lose the election. The Democrats could lose control of the Senate and lose control of the White House. They do not control the House of Representatives at this point. If they continue along this trajectory of supporting and complicity in Israel's genocide. So there's a lot of fear there. And there's also, I think, concern that if this continues, as Azhar mentioned, as Baraka mentioned, Ajamu mentioned, the world will see Israel unmasked, the U.S. unmasked, that this could jeopardize the state of Israel's existence as a Jewish supremacist state. And I say that as a Jewish person and a member of Jewish Voice for Peace. So there is great concern on Capitol Hill. That being said, we see dysfunction within the Republican Party and the Democratic Party over this. President Biden recently reported in the Washington Post, this is not The Intercept, this is not The Guardian, this is not a revolutionary periodical, this is the Washington Post, reported that President Biden had bypassed Congress 100 times since October 7th to send weapons to Israel. Something like weapons every 36 minutes, just barely underreporting the amount that he's sending so that he can bypass Congress. There's concern about this amongst Democrats on the Hill. And we see Biden's approval rating plummeting. It's at about 37%. It may have jumped up a little bit after the State of the Union, but not much. We have a dismal choice for the country. You know, look, I'm a registered Green at this point. I won't be voting for either one of them, but we see basically somebody who's overseeing a genocide, that's Biden, and then somebody like Trump who's threatening a bloodbath against immigrants if he wins. Given this state of affairs, we know that the Democrats are starting to look around and say, gee, we got to do something here. And we had in Michigan and Minnesota great numbers of Democrats voting uncommitted, saying they're not committed to Biden in this general election that's coming up. In Michigan, both of these are swing states. They could go either way for either the Democrats or the Republicans. In Michigan, you had 13%, 100,000 people in the Democratic Party voting uncommitted. In Minnesota, you had 45,000, that's 19%. And those could decide the election. The Data for Progress poll, which I keep mentioning when I talk to members of Congress, shows an overwhelming majority, 2/3 of the US public surveyed want a ceasefire, a permanent ceasefire, and only 12% who were surveyed said they want to continue sending weapons to Israel without any conditions, such as ending indiscriminate bombing of civilians. Right now, the Biden supplemental war spending bill, that's a supplement to the $886 billion military budget. So this is an add-on. This has passed the Senate with over $14 billion for weapons transfers to Israel, $60 billion for continuing the war in Ukraine. CODEPINK, we have called from the beginning for a negotiated peace. We've called out the US government in agitating for this war and continuing it and sabotaging peace agreements. The supplemental that Biden has been pushing also calls for $8 billion for Taiwan and East Asia to further militarize that region for a confrontation or a war with China. $9 billion in humanitarian aid, with which the Democrats like to trumpet, but we know that that would be split between Ukraine, Israel, and Gaza if it even makes it into a final supplemental. Right now, this spending bill is stalled. Why? Because although it passed the Senate, that's controlled by the Democrats, in the House, which is controlled by the Republicans, there is the MAGA wing that supports Trump to the utmost, and they do not want a dime for Ukraine. They also want money to further militarize the border, so they don't want to vote for this as it's packaged currently. The Democrats want the money for Ukraine, and that's why they're packaging it with the money for Israel, because they know that by and large, an overwhelming majority of Congress would vote for that package if it's packaged with Israel. So what's happening? What's happening is that Hakeem Jeffries, he is the ranking member of the House. He doesn't control the House, but he is next in line under the Speaker, who is Mike Johnson from Louisiana. Hakeem Jeffries, who represents Brooklyn, majority people of color, takes hundreds of thousands of dollars from AIPAC. He has sent Jim McGovern out to gather signatures. Jim McGovern, by the way, is a otherwise progressive Democrat, sent him out to collect signatures for a discharge petition. What's that? That's a way to push something to the floor without it having to go through a committee if you can get a majority of members of Congress to sign it. And so far, Jim McGovern hasn't been able to do that. People may vote for something on the floor, but they don't necessarily want to put their name on a discharge petition. So CODEPINK has been saying, we've been sending out alerts, do not sign this discharge petition. Tell your representative not to sign it. If they signed it, remove their name. We do not want this ever to be voted on. We're going to try to delay it as much as possible. It may not be possible, but we want to at least make an effort. So that's one issue there. Also, the issue of UNRWA funding is on the table. In the Senate bill, there was zero money for UNRWA. Under the Trump administration, Trump completely deleted something like, or I don't know, between $300 and $400 million for UNRWA, defunded it. When Biden assumed office, it was reinstated at about $400 million. And then we know recently, after reports from Israel that UNRWA employees, a few of them had collaborated with Hamas, the United States defunded UNRWA along with a dozen other countries. Now it has been reported, UNRWA says its employees were tortured to make false confessions. They were waterboarded by the Israeli military. They were beaten. Their families were threatened. So there's no evidence that this actually happened. And there are calls, the Democrats are calling, some of them are calling to reinstate that money, which would be reinstated in another committee, the the Foreign Operations Committee in the House. The Senate, these bills go back and forth as they're revised, and the Senate may not go along with Republican demands. And there are Republican demands to defund UNRWA permanently. They want that written into legislation. It may not happen because both Biden might not sign that, and the Democrats, they want the money for Jordan as much as for anyone. Another issue, so CODEPINK, our message is reinstate UNRWA funding, no permanent prohibitions against defunding UNRWA, the lifeline for water, food, medicine for 2.3 million people in Gaza. Another issue that has come up is that of TikTok. Okay, so TikTok, recently the House overwhelmingly voted to essentially set the stage for banning TikTok. And why is TikTok important? Because it is politicizing the youth of the United States. We see college campuses, Students for Justice in Palestine organizing across this country. TikTok, there are 170 million people in the United States watching TikTok, scrolling TikTok. 47% of them are under the age of 30. So it's oddly coincidental that last week, the week that the American Israel Public Affairs Committee descended on Congress to lobby for more weapons transfers for Israel, that during that visit, the House overwhelmingly votes to set the stage for banning TikTok. How? Basically, the bill says if the Chinese company ByteDance does not divest, sell off its shares within 6 months, TikTok will be banned in the United States. That's a lot of youth that will be disenfranchised. And they have been, actually, Medea told me 13 and 14-year-olds are calling Senate offices because now the bill goes to the Senate to say, don't pass this bill. The Senate, it's not clear what's going to happen in the Senate. Schumer, the majority leader, has not said he wants to take it to the floor. We have the chair and the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Mark Warner is the chair from Virginia. He's a Democrat. He supports this bill that has raised concerns, antitrust concerns, because who can afford to buy TikTok? Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Facebook. Those are concerns, as well as First Amendment concerns, censorship concerns. We see, however, in the committee, the Senate Committee on Commerce, that's chaired by Cantwell from Washington, she opposes this bill. So it's not clear that it's going to pass, certainly not before this election that's coming up. Those are some of the key issues we're focusing on Capitol Hill, in addition to the street protests that we're backing. And we were very pleased to see Jewish Voice for Peace descending on Hakeem Jeffries' office. I mentioned he's the ranking member of the House. He's the one who sent out Jim McGovern to collect signatures for a discharge petition to push the funding bill to the floor. And there were activists in his office occupying his office and saying, stop, enough U.S. complicity in this genocide. So that's basically the picture and what we're focusing on right now in terms of Capitol Hill and lobbying. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you so much, Marcy. Very, very important presentation. Very important that people understand the kind of work that's done in the U.S. with the Congress. Many of us have seen the images of CODEPINK raising the issue in various congressional settings. So thank you so much for that. This is a marvelous example of the kind of international solidarity that in the end is going to make us all winners. Next, we have Pawel Vangar, who is a researcher and organizer. He serves as the coordinator of the Secretariat at the Progressive International. Pawel.
Thank you so much, Ajamu. It's very good to be here with all of you today. I won't speak for very long, but what I wanted to do is to touch on four central strategies that the Progressive International has taken up basically since October on the question of the Gaza genocide. And these concern the areas of labor, organizing, direct action, legislative action, and protest action. I want to say a little bit about each in turn and invite any organization here to reach out to me if you might be interested in taking part or supporting any of the initiatives. The first strategy has had a lot to do with labor organizing, specifically in trade unions. And it began in October when we worked with a coalition of Palestinian trade unions to translate and amplify the demands that were coming out of Palestine. You might remember that I think all the Palestinian trade unions came together and wrote a joint statement with a set of demands for the international solidarity movement, in particular the international labor movement, which centrally had to do with stopping arms sales. But there were additional statements from specialized unions, for example, from Palestinian journalists, from Palestinian health workers, and others. And I think it's very important that we're aware of these calls and that we try as much as possible to center the demands of the Palestinian people in our work and in our strategies. And not only center the demands in a general sense, but also think very concretely, whether we work in the press or whether we work in companies that might be complicit in some respects, to think very concretely about the kind of responses that we can make based on the demands that are coming out of Palestine. That work also included a call that we launched recently with a group of Palestinian civil society organizations to try to build potential pressure around the idea of an energy embargo of Israel. The hope is that there are some states that are sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, but nonetheless have trade arrangements on energy with Israel that could be pressured into abandoning those relationships, or at least temporarily implementing some kind of embargo. And the third thing in the area of labor organizing is we've been working with a team of researchers for some time to map corporate complicity in the genocide and to develop a kind of spectrum of complicity, where at one end you would have companies that are actually producing weapons or key components or providing key advice or data services or whatever else to support the Israeli genocide. And then you would have a whole spectrum of other forms of complicity. And the idea is that once we go live with this, we'll take it to trade unions, we'll take it to workers with a broad menu of actions that they can take within their companies and within their unions to try to challenge those different forms of complicity. So that should launch fairly soon. It hasn't been published yet, but it will launch, and we'll make sure to push it out on our social media. So that labor set of strategies has a lot to do with working from within corporations to challenge complicity. We've also worked from outside corporations to try and contain and challenge complicity. Specifically, we've been working with what I think is one of the most successful Palestinian solidarity campaigns, which is Palestine Action's effort in the United Kingdom to take on Elbit Systems, which is Israel's largest arms manufacturer. They've developed a strategy that has already shut down one factory permanently, that have forced many corporations to abandon their ties with Elbit. And they're finding increasing success and increasing support And we've worked with them to try to internationalize that current of activism. We held in December a global day of action against Elbit systems, which saw activists in 11 countries, from Brazil to Japan, Belgium to Canada and elsewhere, organize against Elbit systems simultaneously to try and blockade its factories and to try to build awareness of the role that it plays. And the hope is that over time we can lead to the strengthening of this kind of strategic direction. And already we've seen the launch of dedicated Palestine action groups in France, in Belgium, and of course, in addition to the one that launched in the US last year. So that's on direct action. And the third direction we've been looking at is legislative. So we've, of course, talked about the ICJ already, and we tried as much as possible to build support for South Africa's case among legislators in different parts of the world, but also to build increasing support for the idea of an arms embargo. And just a few weeks ago, we coordinated a petition signed by over 200 parliamentarians from countries that are the main suppliers of weapons to Israel, 13 countries, in which they declared a commitment to work in their parliaments for an arms embargo. Now, of course, most of these parliamentarians don't have majorities in their parliaments, but nonetheless, I think it's an important shift in rhetoric and also in confidence, right? It would have been very difficult to make this kind of case, I think, before October. So that's broadly it on the legislative front. And I think the final main strategy that we've been taking up is around protests, around getting people into the streets. We joined several international calls launched by other international coalitions to host global days of action for Palestine at certain key dates. It's important, I think, that we continue that pressure, that people continue to go to the streets, but also that we draw strategic insights from what works and what doesn't. There have been waves and waves over the last few decades of major protests opposing war, and not all of them have had the kind of success that we need today. And I think it's very important to draw strategic insights from the kind of organizing that's happening and really try to escalate in ways that are constructive and that contribute towards ending this cruel and sadistic genocide that's happening. All of that points to the idea that we need a diversity of strategies because the left finds itself in very different circumstances in different countries. We don't all have the same level of resources. We don't all have the Yemeni people's capacity to arrest the flow of maritime trade through the Red Sea. We don't all have the capacity to mobilize, thousands or tens of thousands of people. So we need a diversity of strategies that plays to our strengths, but we also need a unity of purpose to guide those actions and to guide those strategies. I was really struck by the words of Colombia's president, Gustavo Petro, recently, who said that the genocide in Gaza is a warning. It's not the last assault of its kind. It's a warning to all peoples who might try to chart their own sovereign path in the world system that's still unfortunately dominated by the old colonial imperialist blocs. And so it's absolutely necessary that our shared goal is to end this genocide. We have to recognize at the same time that this is not the first and not the last violent assault by imperialism. These types of outbursts will only intensify as the hegemony of the old imperialist bloc continues to wane. It's very important to allow this moment to radicalize us and to really leave us with a clear understanding of the root causes of the violence that's being dealt against the Palestinian people today.
Thank you so much for those comments, and the very critical commentary in terms of the collective understanding that we are just developing globally regarding the true nature of these Western powers. It is a glaring contradiction that people are now really beginning to understand and see when you have the same forces, the same Western powers that that are supporting genocide in Gaza are pretending that they're concerned about Black life in Haiti. And so people are making these connections. And we hope that those connections continue to be made, because this struggle, as we deal with Gaza today, is going to be just part of the overall intensified global struggle that needs to be waged to finally help with this historical transition away from the white world supremacy. Next, we have Lamis, Deek, fantastic Palestinian-born attorney, international practicing attorney based in New York, whose work includes civil, commercial, sanctions, compliance, national security, political, private, and human rights law on the trials, appeals, transactions, and transactional levels. In her advocacy, she co-convened the Global Legal Alliance for Palestine and founded the Palestinian Assembly for Liberation Law Commission on war crimes, justice, reparations, and return. We are honored to have with us Lamis this morning. Lamis?
To unmute. Thank you, Ajamu, and to all the speakers for putting this together and for keeping this beautiful coalition in place and very active and taking this really critical role. I do want to take a moment to thank Margaret Flowers and my friend and colleague Adrian Pine, who have really been carrying a lot of the work in expanding and building this coalition, but also really prioritizing Palestinian self-determination, not just rhetorically, but in practice. And I'm really grateful for that. And I think through the course of my brief intervention, I think it's important that people understand that now more than ever, that needs to be very central to all the work around Palestine, because it's the diversion of that self-determination. People are saying they can't hear me. Can you hear me now? Can everybody hear me? If somebody, okay, Francis says they can hear you well, so it might be somebody's own. So very important, because I think it's critical to kind of deconstruct what's happened. Perversion of discourse and therefore law and political approaches to Palestinians. You know, Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, at the beginning, or maybe the first or second month of the escalated stage of genocide in Palestine, said, oh, wow, it looks like, you know, international law and human rights have been time warped. Well, they were time warped. They were not just frozen, but all those lofty ideals and goals that were supposed to have been enshrined in international law were diverted, recreated, reformatted, given new terms and terminologies. And Palestine, the most addressed and the first addressed issue by the United Nations, as you can see, was the issue that all the Western powers and the greatest powers represented in the UN, the veto powers of the UN Security Council, Palestine became the central goal of colonization and exceptionalism from the right to have rights under international law, right? The most addressed issue, the seminal issue of the United Nations and this new era of international law. We look at preliminarily the Palestinian right to return, UN Resolution 194, one of the earliest resolutions, a condition of Israeli entry into the UN, completely not just delayed, but erased the most basic right to live in, to remain, and to return to one's home, right? Completely erased by US and Western powers. The UN Conciliation Commission on Palestine, which was a committee of state members of the UN that was supposed to have been dedicated to two things, the return of Palestinians to their homes and the restoration of their stolen stolen property, their money from the Zionists, all liquidated by the US government when it took the place of the United Kingdom in becoming the next world power, and realized that if you wanted to be an imperial power in the world, you needed to colonize and control Palestine to do that. So this diversion by law and power, including UN resolutions like UN Resolution 242, like the adoption of the two-state, really awful discourse by the legitimization of Oslo, which fragmented the Palestinian people physically and politically and legally, and their rights. The Palestinian body is being entitled to particular rights. And all of these things are really important to keep in mind as we're organizing and building around Palestine. All these things that you're seeing in Gaza now, I think it's very important to understand, are not new tactics. They are escalated and they are industrialized and happening on an industrial level. But the torture, the murder, the deprivation of access to food and food sovereignty, all of these things. And it's Palestinians, we've been screaming, we had a whole session panel on it, that it's apartheid for genocide, it's settler colonization for genocide, it's military occupation for genocide. The last formal session that we had on this was in June. We've been saying this for 75 years, but because we've become such subjects of so much political and organizing work, we're the last to be heard. And so the other thing that I want to state, it's time more than ever to listen to Palestinians and take Palestinian leadership. And this is why we formed both the Palestinian Assembly for Liberation and the Palestinian Assembly for Liberation's Law Commission on War Crimes, Justice, Reparations, and Return, and the Global Legal Alliance for Palestine, specifically led and guided by Palestinians under and for the purpose of implementing Palestinian self-determination and ending the era of this cacophony of voices and legal filings that talk about us in these confused abstracts, and really bringing the Palestinian demand at the forefront of the legal domain. Nakba, the Nakba, right, which needs to become Nakba and right to return, need to become the real guiding frameworks of international legal work and legal work around Palestine. We're an international project. They are an international project and need to continue by having an international response. Palestinians weren't nakbid by Zionists alone. It was the Western powers. And so proceeding from this, from saying we want Palestinian self-determination, the demands for full liberation, the dismantlement of all war criminal institutions and the institutions of Zionist supremacy, return, reparations, all of that coming into the legal domain, and therefore must come into the political domain, is more critical now than ever. The words of the day for us, and Adrian has attended some of our meetings with governments on these issues, is reclamation of our power and the utilization of the law to build and expand that power. And that has been very powerful. During our meetings with several governments, and including one very sympathetic government, and I've been preaching this for a long time, which is, these terrorism and sanctions frameworks, though developed by the West, are not the property of the West. And it's time that people understand that these frameworks are very broad. These have become the dominant frameworks and should be used as tools of political and military power by those seeking to end the genocide, right? The axis of resistance is the axis of resistance to genocide, not just now, but it has been for a long time. And we've seen how effective that has become. The terrorism framework developed by the US primarily was developed specifically for the perpetuation of the colonization of Palestine and the criminalization of Palestinians who sought to work to liberate Palestine or to even coordinate together globally. We are an exiled and dispersed people as a result of the Zionist entity and the Zionist project, Israeli, American, and British. And it was our coordination attempt, our attempt to bring power to the liberation struggle that led to the advent of the terrorism frameworks. I had been lecturing this for almost 2 decades. And recently the CCR and Darrell Lee put pen to paper, right? These frameworks need to come back into logical order. What we've seen is not just the perversion of language, but really the perversion of law. The post-World War II alleged, international human rights system has completely been perverted by the axis of genocide and by the Zionist entity. So our goal in doing this is to bring logic back to the law. I'll talk a little bit about our work in the PAL Committee. I want to talk about the Palestinian Assembly for Liberation. The Palestinian Assembly for Liberation has sought to turn our demands in an Auda, return, liberation, resistance, all of this into an actual implementable program that also reunites Palestinians so that Palestinians become the leading force of the Palestinian liberation struggle and the guiding force of all ally and solidarity movements, as they should be, in a way that is, number one, implementable, and number two, logical, coherent, and addresses all Palestinian rights and gives them priority. So we've been for reunification, for having a direct role in the democratic processes. So it's not the CIA and MI6 who are propping up who speaks for the Palestinian people. But Palestinians are actively involved in determining their future and actually crafting out both what the liberation struggle looks like and what a liberated Palestine looks like. In the PAL Commission, we convened the Global Legal Alliance for Palestine, which has aimed at bringing coordination and therefore coherence to legal work on Palestine. Legal filings become precedent. Legal filings become political narrative. Legal filings become political positions that are adopted by states. And it's very critical for us that these are coherent and reflective of the full gamut of Palestinian demands. In the PAL Commission, the word of the day has been compliance, sanctions, right, and implementation. We began our work by providing resources. I've represented governments and government actors previously in my private law practice, and I'm aware of the limitations of access to legal resources by states in the global south, whether it's financial or language barriers. And so we began the ICJ Pro Bono Legal Support Project, where we actually gave the legal resources, the instructions and sample packets at the time before the arguments were had, to the extent that we were able, and meeting with them and letting them know that we don't ask without offering them our own private services.
De pouvoir nous réunir avec ces pays pour pouvoir demander nos
are very broad. So provisional measures and compliance were really the terms of the day when we were talking to governments about this implementation. And part of that implementation has talked about, well, 70 to 80% of Palestinians in Gaza are refugees, 1948 and 1967 refugees. And so we've asked for provisional measures reflective of that, even of governments who didn't submit their notices, and we were able to secure the submission of notices of intent to join the ICJ case. I think it was 3 or 4. Adrian, can I slow down for the language interpreter? Yes, I'm so sorry. I'm just trying to meet my time without going over. Thank you. So talking about provisional measures, talking about prior mechanisms that have been buried by the UN Security Council that were supposed to be serving Palestinians, and taking up the space that unfortunately the Palestinian Authority has failed to take up, including discussing what legislation looks like in terms of implementing these measures. Turning to compliance, just to give folks a few examples, between the ICJ provisional measures and decision on the preliminary orders and the Biden's executive order on settlements, what we have is now broad tools, if you will, and avenues to implement and demand that companies, universities, governments, legislators, local city councils, all facets, all countries now have this obligation to comply both with international law, then with their domestic counterparts of that international law. What we also have is an expansion of universal jurisdictions entry into where it can legislate and regulate. For now, it has meant and helped us shut down one of the really egregious illegal settlement sales in Palestine. And when one considers the amount of violence and suffering Palestinians endure just to be able to live in their homes or keep their lands, it was through our, in good part, I want to say, because it was after we filed and served notices and demands and complaints to these people putting on these grossly illegal settlement sales that we began to start to see the cancellation. And, there were some quite direct attacks on me with people showing up at my home after these cancellations happened. So we understand how powerful a tool the law can be, right? And these violations that are happening, especially post ICJ and executive order, have real criminal consequences inside and outside the US, but the law is not self-executing. And so we are forced to undertake these actions to execute the law. The DOJ is certainly not interested, nor are other governments. And some of these governments might not even be aware of the doors that are opened now on whether it's media regulation, corporate regulation, university regulation. The ICJ provisional orders were also important in ways that I think might have flown under the radar for a lot of people. Two really salient points raised, aside from everything else that you've heard, is the court's acknowledgement of the dehumanization of Palestinians and the need to end that dehumanization. This is a very powerful tool, especially for activists and organizers, whether it's on campus or government speech or media speech, including their own speech. And what needs to happen is kind of this calculation and this mapping out about how each term and all these euphemisms that have become the norm in Western society for Palestinian life and Palestinian actions are part of that dehumanization. And the recognition by the ICJ of Palestinians as being a distinct people protected under the tenets of international law. So compliance for us and implementation of provisional measures has been really the guiding force, including legislating, asking governments to legislate, including having them kind of look at a lot of the buried mechanisms and create new mechanisms and absolutely regional alliances. One thing that we'll be distributing in the coming days is an assessment, which we intend to share very widely with as many governments as possible, on the legality of the naval blockade in the context of genocide. This really gives a new dimension, right, to US and Western pressure on states, especially states in the global South, as to how they deal with, these regional alliances, which the Yemen blockade certainly is, and to considering other alliances. We're also preparing through both legal, diplomatic, and asking for regional alliances on tribunals, specifically on the issue of Palestine, led again by the Palestinian demand for self-determination. And then the last thing I want to say in terms of the legal realm, we've also been working with key governments on stepping away from calling for the two-state solution as some sort of solution for anything, and saying, please, you don't need to talk about one state or two state. Have a look at how we came to the two-state. But above all else, precedent is very important, and the precedent that needs to be established is the dismantlement of all of these war criminal institutions inside Palestine, the institutions of Zionist supremacy, war crimes, apartheid, incremental genocide, and escalated genocide become very critical to talk about before we can talk about anything else. So we were very happy to see the South African government make that first announcement. We intend to expand that announcement. So we've married the legal with the diplomatic through the coalition and through our own work with Palestinian grassroots organizers on the ground outside of Palestine and globally, to really widen the scope of our work and make sure that each facet of the Palestinian liberation movement and its solidarity corollaries is really covering all bases, as we do with the legal, by the way. So with the legal, we look at ICC cases, wonderful, beautiful. We help, consider new ICJ cases, but then we're looking at how these get implemented in countries all over the world through compliance, through domestic cases, through legislation. So I think that covers it for me. I don't want to take too much time. I don't know if Adrian, sorry, I went on a little long, if you'd like to add anything now or later, as you've been central integral to a lot of the ICJ work. And I thank you all for your time. And I look forward to more work with all of you, inshallah.
Thank you so much, Lamis. And we will ask Adrian to, of course, jump in with doing the Q&A section. Fantastic presentation.
And thank you, Ajamu, for keeping us on track as well.
Yes, it's been a fantastic set of presentations thus far. Very, very impressive. And many of the, I mean, you raised so many issues, but one of the things that seems to be consistently developing from the presentations is this understanding of the contradictions coming out of at the end of the Second Imperialist War. You referred to it as the restructuring of the colonial order. And it's important to note, and you can see this in 1948, you have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The same year, you have the Nakba, and you have the UN system welcoming into its process the racist nationalist government of South Africa. These contradictions of the liberal order are really now have come to a point, and people are beginning to really understand it, and understanding the political implications of that for the global community. I hope we can get into that, some more of that in the Q&A section. So let's go to our last presenter. And I know that people are really waiting to get into the Q&A part of this. And I think that the organizers are going to have to make a question or call the question on how we do this in terms of the time. I'm hoping we can, as long as people are prepared to be here, that maybe we make sure we have time for those Q&As. Our next presenter, Fuad Abdul Saif. He can correct this. An expert in agriculture and environmental issues, serves as the director of the Union of Agricultural Work Committees, where he strongly supports Palestinian farmers' rights. As a board member of La Via Campesina, he promotes the welfare of peasants worldwide and is
Il travaille sur le développement.
Highlighting his commitment to sustainability.
Ele está comprometido com a biodiversidade e o
In Area C, aimed at enhancing
والمناخ والقضايا الفلسطينية ودعم صمود الفلسطينيين.
further underscores his impactful efforts in sustainable development and the advocacy for human rights. Fuad.
Thank you, Ajamu. I thought my name was like an easy.
Now for a brother from the ghetto.
And it's an easy name in Arabic, Fuad Abu Saif. So it's not that. So thank you, and yes, thanks for the organizers and for giving us the chance to speak in this very, I think, important and wonderful webinar. Let me first introduce my organization, which is Union of Agricultural Work Committees, UWAC, which is one of the 6 Palestinian organizations designated in 2021 by Israel as a terrorist organization. And they designated UWAC as a terrorist organization because of our huge work that we are doing in Area C in West Bank. I'm talking with you right now from West Bank. And UWAC is like having different offices and branches in West Bank and Gaza. And we are now shifted to alleviate the starvation and response to the huge needs in Gaza for the Palestinians under this genocide war committed by Israel. Also, our main objective is to support the Palestinian and mainly in particular the Palestinian farmer having access to their resources in Area C in West Bank. And again, later on we will cover that when we talk about the starvation and Gaza, because it's also the agricultural area in buffer zone area in Gaza. So we believe in food sovereignty, and we believe this is the most important part for the Palestinians, since we are not industrial area. We are just villagers and farmers, typically from hundreds of years, and agriculture is important for the Palestinians to offer the food. And this war again emphasized that sovereignty and having access and improving and enhancing the Palestinian access to their resources is like a crucial in such situation. And Israel and they designated the Palestinian NGOs, especially work as a terrorist organization, because they know the huge and the important role that we are doing to enhancing and supporting the Palestinian having access to resources. When it comes to resources, it means to land, to water, to seeds, and also to border, because without that, I think it will be impossible to produce your food. And since now, the beginning of this genocide war, Israel started its invasion against Gaza by attacking the agricultural area, which is, I mean agricultural area, which means the source of food in Gaza. Before the war, the Palestinians and farmers in Gaza supposed and succeeded to produce more than actually 60% of their food from the agricultural land, which is started from the north of Gaza, Beit Hanun and Beit Lahiya, then going down to Khan Yunis and the Rafah. Then all the war, actually, all Israeli army invaded Gaza through these areas. So it's like going from the north to the south, destroying the food system in Gaza in purpose. And they succeeded to do that, because all the war is happening actually at that area. At that time, before the war, just a few days before Israel invaded Gaza, there were around 60,000 tons of vegetables already cultivated and supposed to be harvested by the farmers as the basic food for the Gazan people, which is composed like 50 or 60% of their food at that time. Unfortunately, Israeli army immediately, when they entered Gaza, destroyed at the first thing before even the bombing houses. They bombing these greenhouses and all the line of agricultural field in the border, in which they call it buffer zone. They started the starvation policy at the first hour when they actually started this war. This is an important to mention, because they built on that by Gallant declared that they, of course, will impose and put Gaza under a huge blockade, where they preventing food on water, electricity, everything to let it going inside Gaza, and this is what we call it starvation. And talking about starvation, it's not just preventing the people from food, but also the daily life of the Palestinian, especially in Ramadan, is like cannot be described. They don't have food, they don't have water, and they don't know how to manage during the day, especially in Ramadan right now, when they sitting, for example, at this hour now, because this is the time of breakfast to finish the day of fasting. They are not sitting at before. They just continuing fasting by having some very few quantity of water or grass that they have here or there. So it's in continuing fasting before Ramadan and until now. And this is why it's not just what we hear in the news and in the media that, okay, they mention a number of the martyrs and victims that killed by bombing. But if we go in the details of the lifestyle now of the Palestinian who's living in starvation, it's something cannot be described. I'm saying that because we have a huge, we have a strong team working in Gaza, and we're working in this global campaign to stop starvation in Gaza by providing the people with food. And since there is no aid comes from outside, we relying on the farmers who still providing and cultivating some food from inside Gaza, which is not many of the people is knowing that, because there is two things that. And yesterday, for example, if you notice that Israel is attacking and bombing like hundreds of greenhouses in Deir el-Balah and in Khan Yunis. These greenhouses was cultivated recently with vegetables. This is the only source of vegetables that we have, and we include in our campaign to distribute for the starving people in Gaza. So there is a plan to even not just to blockage the borders and preventing the aid getting in Gaza from outside Rafah, for example, but also there is a veto, Israeli veto, to damage and destroy the food system inside Gaza by even not letting the Palestinians to plant while during the war, because we have some farmers who succeeded to cultivate, and we have some resources in Gaza planting this type of vegetables, for example, which is important and crucial. We don't have fresh food, is not available and not allowed to enter from outside. The other thing is like what Israel allowed to get in Gaza through this kind of like trucks after they, of course, check and everything. It's mainly canned food. And as everyone aware of, not I don't know, during the war, there is like a protocol what kind of food you should feed the people during the blockade or during the war. You cannot keep feeding the people for like a couple of months. Now it's like month number 6 with canned food. We are noticed now as a technical team on the ground, and we received a report from our colleagues and team in Gaza that there is like a kind of consequences from canned food that some of the international organization is entering and focusing on and providing the people in the northern part of Gaza in particular, because it's full of salt, full of preservatives. And it's like we noticed that the people is like suffering, and in terms to it's like also a diseases. The blood pressure is increased. The children is suffering when they keep taking this kind of food, which means that after 2 months, the protocol saying that you have to diversify the food and add another type of food. So Israel is allowing just canned food to enter to Gaza in purpose. Again, it's okay. We're allowing food to enter, but this kind of food is canned, which is now turned to be negative for the Palestinian in health in Gaza, in particular for children. That's the other thing we don't understand, which is unbelievable, that all the world cannot stop Israel, powerless to force Israel to stop the genocide. It's something we don't. From other hand, U.S. and other like Western government can do that if they put Israel in activate, for example, the sanctions and allow, because the other way that they try to support in dealing with this crisis, the starvation, as a humanitarian crisis, which is okay. It's a humanitarian, but it's a political issue. You have to. The priorities is to ceasefire and force Israel to stop its genocide, and then the food will be, the starvation issue will be solved, because of like there is someone preventing the food to entering to Gaza. And again, what they trying to do is like parachuting food, which is like another way of, I don't know what to call it, because this is also in many times, in many cases, increasing the problem and create a new conflict inside Gaza between even the families and the people themselves. Because parachuting like that is like from sky, then the people start running. Then the one who's like strong can run and have some food if it's not fall down in the sea. But what about the women? What about the children who's now responsible and heading like more than 70% of the families in the northern part of Gaza? Sorry, so they cannot, of course, run after the plane where it will be dropped the food. This is disrespectful for the Palestinians, and you have to, if you want to support, you have to support the dignity of the people before you support them with the food. They don't need the food if it's like just throwing that, and you feel comfortable that you're doing something to support in general. That's another like way of shameful that the Palestinians also here in Gaza, and the reports comes from the team in Gaza is saying. Always we rely on agricultural sector again for even if there is a ceasefire, if there is like a kind of agreement that Israel just let the Palestinian inside Gaza to cultivate and to produce food, they can compensate and they can feed, but they are destroying again the
والمطالبة مثلا بأن يسمح للفلسطينيين بزراعة، ولكن ما تفعله إسرائيل الآن
minas o la necesidad de desmineralizar, eso no está.
for the children,
As crianças estão desidratadas, com hepatite, problemas de pele. A água que eles têm acesso
Pas accès à l'eau, également parce qu'il y a une pollution importante. Je pense de manière générale.
The thing is different right now, this kind of like a huge solidarity all over the world, this kind of efforts done by everyone, turning the Palestinian cause to be like a human, but also a global cause for everyone. This is the only pressure that we feel that can lead to changing the fact and the reality on Palestine here. In West Bank, the Israel is benefiting from what's going on in Gaza, and everyone globally just attention with what's going on in Gaza. Here they are also committing this kind of ethnic cleansing in everywhere. There is 300,000 families in Area C stuck in their areas. They cannot move and they don't have access to their food. Also, there is a starvation in Palestine. Maybe it's not like in Gaza, but in West Bank, but maybe it's not like in Gaza, but also here that they suffering from risky to go outside, living their areas, communities, camps, hamlets. The settlers is attacking in each night. They killing and burning the houses at nights. They also steal the everything they can arrive to destroy the farms, for example, the sheep and goats, etc., which is the means for the Palestinians to have an access to the food. So it's a war against food. And it's like using starvation as a weapon, where of course it's like clear and well known that it's forbidden, but Israel put itself as usual above all laws. And doing that, I think it's not it's a base for other countries in the future to do the same, because okay, it's happening once by Israel, and it's the first time happening like that since maybe a century. And anyone can do that, built on what Israel is doing now, because no one holding Israel accountable. If Israel again, and after this genocide and after this huge crime committing here in Palestine, it's not a matter of killing until now 31 or 33. Of course, the number of victims and murders, as we have reported from the field, is like everyone will be shocked and surprised after the ceasefire, and it's they changing the everything inside Gaza, the land, the human, the behavior of the people. Nothing remained. They destroyed everything. But if they even escape again this time, I think no one will respect any of this international law, as the Palestinians were not believing on that right now, because it's just used to silence everyone. Could just now the German Prime Minister is again repeat 1 hour ago that Israel has the right to defend itself. I don't know how they said that while an occupying power like has the right to defend itself, and people who's located under occupation, they don't have the right to defend and struggle and resist this occupation. It's like all this kind of like terms and laws, international laws should be like rephrase again, should be imposed Israel to commit it on that. Otherwise, the world will be just jumping from genocide to another genocide. And they have the example, it's Israel committing right now. I think sanction could impact immediately if the world is serious and the government, Western government and US serious. Israel should be like sanctions against its genocide committing here in Palestine. This will make it different. Otherwise, they will continue doing, and they will invade it to Rafah. And again, we will see another terrifying pictures coming from Rafah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pawel. And we again apologize for butchering your name. You know, I'm a victim of colonial education, so please accept my apologies. Fantastic presentation. Very important issues in terms of this issue of food. People forget that theoretically within the UN system, the UN human rights system, food theoretically is supposed to be a human right. But yet we see again how food has been weaponized in this colonial context and weaponized and used as a tool as part of this genocidal activity or action on the part of the settler colonial fascist state of Israel. So we're going to now go into the Q&A section, and I'm going to look for some guidance from the organizers in a moment. But first, I'm going to share some of the questions that have been submitted.
On va maintenant commencer la session des questions-réponses. Je vais poser 2 ou 3 questions en même temps et nous demandons aux conférenciers à répondre aux éléments auxquels ils voudront bien répondre. Nous leur demandons d'être succincts.
That I'm going to raise is a question that was directed to
Maintenant, la première question.
By which we can also ask Pawel to also weigh in on. But the question was if you can elaborate on the ICJ ruling regarding what you referred to as powerful tools that can be relevant in this struggle. But I would add to that, if you can talk about those powerful tools and ask others to maybe weigh in too, how those tools, those legal tools can be utilized in the various national contexts that we find that the people are situated in. We have people on this call from literally around the world. So if Lamis is still there, because I can't see I know she had to leave early, but if you are able to respond to that, then that'd be the first question. The other question that we'd like to tackle is the question, very interesting question, regarding any thoughts on how best to confront the growing Zionist tactic of denialism. We are seeing more commentary by Zionists and their accolades denying the number of Palestinians murdered by the Israeli-US war machine. And again, anybody of the panelists can jump on that question also. So let's start with those first 2 questions. Oh, Lamis had to leave. Okay. Pawel, can you tackle that question of the legal implications of this ICJ ruling? And you already talked a little bit about the various sectors of societies that can augment or complement the legal strategy with bottom-up grassroots struggles. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I'm not a lawyer, so that's I'll start with that caveat, but I'll do my best. I think there's a political dimension to the ICJ ruling and a legal dimension. Both are equally important in different ways. The political dimension has to do with a nation like South Africa, which itself was once a victim of a Western-backed apartheid regime, a colonial apartheid regime, has taken Israel, a key imperial outpost, to the International Court of Justice. That in itself is a seismic thing and speaks to a new phase in a long-standing attempt by the countries of the global South to reconfigure the international institutions to serve their interests. Now, there's a big question here of the extent to which that can be done. There are institutions that are beyond redemption because they were very clearly designed from the get-go to be instruments of colonial domination. But there are other institutions that operate more as containers, and they reflect the current balance of power in the world. And as that balance of power shifts, I think we'll see more countries from the global South try at least to use the mechanisms available under international law to deliver justice, to seek justice for the majority of humanity. And that's a very important process, and it's important to support that process, to support that pursuit of sovereignty that we're seeing emerge in the global South today. On the legal dimension, I think the ICJ ruling sets a very powerful precedent. There was a decision, I think in February this year, by a court, Dutch appellate court, which ruled that the Netherlands had to stop supplying components to F-35 jets to Israel on the basis of, basically on the basis of the ICJ judgment, because there was a very significant risk, the court said, that those jets would be used in actions that violate the human rights of the Palestinian people. And so I think the legal power of what happened at the ICJ is precisely that it establishes a precedent with which it's much more difficult for judges to deny what's happening on grounds of human rights, and paves the way, potentially, in countries that have arms that trade in weapons with Israel, to legal action that stops that trade from happening. Now, there's a big question as to, you know, the degree of trust that we can put in the judicial systems of Western countries that are so adamant on maintaining their complicity and on escalating their complicity in the genocide. But at least it is an important step that creates more breathing room, I think, for legal activists and also for judges to make decisions on you know, things concerning Israel and their country's relationship with Israel. I don't know if that's helpful, Ajamu.
Very, very helpful. Anybody else would like to comment on that? In particular, again, looking at the strategies that can be employed by activists in various parts of the globe, putting political pressure on their national governments, building coalitions that will help to continue the shift in power, if you will, the global balance of power away from Israel, away from the U.S. settler state, back to the people. Anybody else like to tackle any aspect of that? Or the second question, which is connected to an ideological component, and that is this issue of denialism. Anybody else?
This is Marcy.
Marcy, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I was just going to say that I'm finding it very challenging in my own community. I live in Santa Barbara on Chumash land, California, about 2 hours north of Los Angeles. I use the word genocide a lot, and people push back on me and say, no, the Holocaust was genocide. This isn't genocide. And I share with them the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide. And I say, yes, absolutely. And I share the South African ruling, but I feel that we just have to keep saying that. You know, we have to keep repeating that and push back hard.
Exactly. I mean, that's the only way one shifts consciousness, because it's been so ingrained a notion of genocide that is connected to the Holocaust, of these various forms of genocide we see around the world, somehow does not seem to connect up, to resonate in terms of awareness, consciousness among the general public. But that seems to be shifting, and so this consistency in terms of shifting the framework is absolutely necessary. And we're seeing significant progress on that. Another question then that maybe panelists can jump on is what kinds of activities, what can be done, what kind of pressure can be applied on governments in the so-called Middle East, or what we refer to as West Asia, to be more forthright in their opposition to this genocide taking place in Gaza and actually also the West Bank. What should be the focus of those demands on those national governments? What actions are taking place that people see as effective, and what further actions can be considered to increase the pressure on these governments that are objectively collaborating with the Israeli settler colonial project? Anybody?
Yeah. Yeah. Allow me quickly, just yes. Yeah,
Yes, sir.
I
Go
think
ahead.
I'm sorry, I hear my voice. Okay. Now, I think it's important question. As I mentioned in my presentation, what everyone is doing right now, these waves of protesters all over the world in the street is like very useful. It's not just for the to impose the government in your like governments or Western government or even elsewhere, but also for the Palestinians. It's and for me it's important that sending an important messages to the Palestinians that they are not alone. For some maybe it's not enough, but for the Palestinian it's important. It's very important and crucial for their steadfastness and confronting this genocide in Gaza and in West Bank here. So to continue this kind of pressure, demonstrations, protests, and everywhere is important. Maybe we have to, and there is some in some levels, and there is in some to close and shut down some important centers and governmental like bodies in some areas is also will lead to pressure. The punishment the government in elections is also important. That's the only way not to give up, to continue until finally there is something will be changed and messages in everywhere. Also, before this war, Israel was for 17 years putting Gaza Strip on cages, on low cages. Now Israel also is totally isolated in the war, which is important. This is one of the impacted from this war, that Israel is not now move freely and comfortably like before. They are also isolated, and we can say they are in very bad situation in terms of the war and as what they used to do and in the past. So it's effective activities we have to continue, in particular continuing the pressure from street.
Thank you so much. Anybody else? Well, how about this comment? And this is a comment in the Q&A, and it's a comment that I just looked at in the chat. in terms of the strategies that can be employed to put pressure on the Zionist entity. This comment says that the only way that that can be done most effectively is through an economic siege. To begin to boycott all maritime shipping companies that serve the Israeli ports, create an international list of those companies, in particular those container companies. And this is connected to a comment that says that it raised the question, where are the examples in terms of union solidarity, of unions refusing to load container ships going to Israel? We've seen some examples of that. But can anybody talk about this as part of the strategies of boycott, sanctions, divestment? And to what degree do we see this as an important element of the next phase of resistance? For many of us, and I'm going to editorialize for a second, who were part of the liberation movement, supporting that movement in South Africa, the comprehensive boycott that we were able to exert on the South African apartheid regime was critical. And it's interesting that this tool seems to be the potential of it seems to be more effectively recognized by the enemy. And we see this in terms of them attempting to preempt this tool by making it illegal to advocate for or support BDS. But it seems that the enemy seems to have a better understanding of its potential than progressive forces and radical forces around the world. So, how do we, or is it a tool that should, in fact, be a centerpiece of this next phase of resistance to the apartheid regime in Israel? Because we know that as tremendous as these provisional measures are for us in terms of the ideological, the political struggle, and we understand that material force can only dislodge material force, and that material force has to emanate from the organized people, the organized resistance globally. Does anybody would like to speak to this question? Marcy?
Sure, Ajamu. I put a news article on my Facebook page, which got a lot of attention. A major trade union in India with over 3,500 members in 11 Indian ports has refused to handle all cargo ships transporting weapons to Israel. And we know that Modi's regime in India is a very close friend of Netanyahu in Israel, and a lot of trade underway, a lot of exports of arms. So that's very inspiring. And I know that in this country, the ILWU, I believe, is organized to shut down a port with weapons to Israel in Oakland. So I think we have to encourage our labor organizations to stand in solidarity, to issue statements in solidarity. I think, and I've written about the importance of an embargo on oil, arms, and technology, both imports and exports to Israel. I also think, however, that the soft power is equally, if not more important, and that is to tackle organizations or address organizations like the Anti-Defamation League that is working overtime to shut down Students for Justice in Palestine on college campuses, and to tackle, to address the Birthright Israel that paints this picture of Israel as a refuge of safety for Jews. It's their land. It's doesn't belong to the Palestinians. That these are very important too, that these tell a story, a narrative that's powerful. And so we need to work on both fronts.
Exactly. Thank you, Marcy. Anyone else like to tackle this strategic question?
So just quickly, there is another way of like, which is actually most of the Israelis who's living here having like double citizenship. They have two passports. Most of them having a European passport. and most of them is as soldiers, and now they are participating and in this genocide in Gaza and ethnic cleansing in West Bank. At least there should be a kind of measurements against them to prevent them from entering, for example, Europe. This should be taken in consideration in the struggle and part of the sanctions. That will be also an important, I think.
Absolutely correct.
May I add at one point
Yes.
To this question, which is that I think it's worth remembering that the Zionist economy is immensely fragile. It's something of a fiction. It was built on the racial exclusion of the Palestinian people by the kind of selective industrialization of the state by the newly arrived Jewish bourgeoisie. It is heavily sustained on one hand by foreign investments. Something like 40% of Israeli GDP is made up of the high-tech sector, including, as someone said in the comments, companies like Google, but also many other Western tech companies that operating there. On the other hand, it's sustained by hyper-exploited Palestinian labor, often within that same high-tech sector, through all kinds of economic structures that allow Israel to exert control over the West Bank and over the conditions of Palestinian labor. And the radicalization of the Zionist project has spooked a lot of the kind of more liberally minded investor base in Israel, and we've seen some degree of capital flight over the past couple of years or so. And so I think the economic question is absolutely fundamental, and it's one that will ultimately unwind this whole colonial project, because when the cash taps are shut off, there's very little to sustain that project. And as Fuad just said, a lot of people there have double citizenship. Many people come specifically to serve in the military or to work in high-paying jobs for a bit and then go back. So there's a system that will be incapable of at some point of handling its own contradictions, and the strategy of the BDS, but also the strategy of the kinds of blockades that have been taking place against companies like Zim, against Elbit Systems and others, absolutely have a material impact on Israel, and I think need to be escalated and advanced further.
Thank you so much. I think that with this comment, we're going to have to begin to move toward closure. We're now at about a two-hour mark. Been a fantastic discussion. As we move toward closure, I'm going to ask Margaret or Andrea or both to take a few moments to share with the gathering some of the actions that we know people are involved in globally, and to make people aware of those actions and what's coming out of emanating from the coalition. We also want to consider, I think, a date and a method by which people who are on this call, who may not already be plugged in, can participate in the next mass meeting of this coalition. So we're going to ask Margaret or Andrea to come on. As Lamis said earlier, we definitely want to salute these two warriors who have kept this process moving, involved in hours of work to keep this process moving. And we just want to say too, as we get ready to bring them on, that we know that there are more questions we didn't have a chance to get to. We know that there are some people wanted to raise questions from the audience, from the participants. We weren't able to do that, but if you are interested and committed to this process, of course, then we can raise some of those. You can raise some of those strategic questions, because that's what we are moving toward now at the next gathering of the broader coalition. So Margaret or Andrea, who is going to close us out with that information?
Hello, I don't know if I'm on. I don't see my video.
We hear you. We hear you.
Okay. All right, that's good enough. Hi, everybody. This has been such an amazing webinar. I just want to say thank you to BAP for hosting. Thank you to all of the panelists for such fantastic and diverse presentations. A special thanks to all the interpreters who have done such incredible work interpreting into the various languages. We appreciate you so much, and particularly recognize how important interpretation is to building an internationalist and global movement. And so hopefully going forward, we can have even more languages. So thank you again to the interpreters. I hadn't prepared any remarks, but just off the top of my head, in terms of the actions that as a coalition we are working towards in the coming month. To start out with, oh, I just had it up and now I have lost the document again, so I apologize. But to start out with, there's on March 30th, the World March of Women has called for a global day of action. That's a rolling action. So they're, I think, asking for everybody to take actions from 12 to 1 p.m., whatever time zone you're in. And I would encourage folks to go to the website of the World March of Women, or March Mundial. It's I think more active in the French and Spanish, but you can see it in English as well. So that's March 30th, which of course is also Palestinian Land Day, and corresponds with the BDS campaign for the entire month of March, which has already been mentioned. It's usually Land Week. BDS, which is one of our coalition's members, is organizing actions and boycotts for all of this month. I want to remind folks, if they haven't, if it hasn't been mentioned or they haven't heard yet, that the dates were just set for Nicaragua's court case against Germany for its complicity in this genocide at the World Court. That's going to be April 8th and 9th. So we will stay tuned for that. We are also planning on organizing, along with UAC and Fuad and the La Via Campesina, another global day of fasting and action for Gaza, like the one that we did earlier this month. I think that we'll send out information about it. I think it will probably be, the next one will probably be April 13th, but we'll confirm that later. So we would call on everybody to develop actions in your regions, the things that make sense for you, to call attention to the use of starvation as genocide. And there are a number of other things coming up that our coalition members are participating in. There's a big action in Tunis, the 11th, 12th, and 13th of May, that's organized by Maghreb Mazrek. The World Social Forum is having a global day of action on May 15th. So we'll be sending out to our email list updates about all the upcoming actions. And very soon we will also have social media. So please, everybody, stay tuned for that. And we'll be posting all of the information about what we're doing there. Just a final note, it's such an incredible honor to be working with such an amazing group of people. As Lamis said earlier, our top priority in this international coalition is to ensure that that Palestinians and Palestinian organizations are taking the lead, and then following that the lead is really coming from the global South. I'm speaking to you from the belly of the beast, from Washington, D.C., but I'm very clear as an anthropologist and as somebody from the United States that we need to not be replicating imperialism in our internationalist solidarity organizing. And so just want to thank everybody again for being here. And for being part of this incredible social movement coalition to pressure the governments to stop, to end this fascist genocide once and for all. It's been 76 years. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Andrea. Can you share though, how can people plug into the list to get information on the next meeting of the coalition?
For the next meeting of the coalition, I would ask people to let's see. Right now, the best I can do is if people can if they want, they can send their emails to me. I will put my email up in the chat if I can find the chat. Just a moment. And also, yes, if folks who are adding them on the list, that's fine. I assume we will have saved the chat here so that I'll be able to access that. So I think what you're referring to, Ajamu, is what has been our core committee for organizing.
No.
Oh.
We have to have the mass character of the coalition that we know we are in the midst of developing. So if people can send your emails to Andrea, then you will be notified when we organize this next phase of the coalitional work.
Oh, well, Ajamu, what we have is from our first two letters, from the letter that garnered 2,000 signatures calling on social movements to demand that states back the South African case with declarations of intervention. We actually have collected all the emails from that. And so that's where we've been sending out the notifications, as well as the more recent letter led by UAC against the use of starvation as genocide. So that's where we have collected all of those, the emails that we've sent out. So anybody who's received an email will still receive that. But again, folks who have added their emails here, I am happy to add them to the list, and I am putting my email in the chat as well in case anybody wants to email me with any questions about that.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and thank you again to the fantastic panelists. This has been a very high level conversation. Thank you again to Margaret Flowers, also the tech crew that had a real challenge. You know, when you're doing these kinds of international webinars and you have for multiple languages, it's a real challenge, and especially because of even more intense challenge when there's some technical issues that we had at the top of this program. And one reason why we want to make sure, Andrea and others, that we have some way of communicating with folks, even though this was a improvised request, was because we have a lot of requests that people have about how to get access to this program. And once we figure that out, we want to be able to communicate to people how they can get access to the copy of this fantastic webinar. And so this list that we're going to gather would be a list that will take shape in one form or
Voilà,
another.
vraiment fantastique.
We just have to figure that out. But the demands from the people to want to be a part of these processes is what we,
Et la demande des gens de faire partie de ce processus.
and that's what we're going to attempt to try to do. So again, thank you to everyone. I know that there is some that part of this was picked up by YouTube on the Black Alliance of Peace YouTube channel. We had some issues with Facebook. We got to figure out what those were and how we, in fact, will have a comprehensive program that people can have, because we have like 4 or 5 different languages. And so stay in tune, stay in contact, keep on with this historic struggle, and thank everybody again. All power to the people.
Thank you.